Born on this day, August 15, 1769, in Corsica, perhaps the greatest military commander and French leader ever, the first emperor of France, and perhaps one of history's most 10 important people, Napoleon Bonaparte. His contributions to the story of Europe are legendary, with his part in the development of liberal ideas, education, and the civil law code, only dwarfed by his impressive and nearly flawless military record, which involved massive success and conquests. Although an Italian by birth, Napoleon, encouraged by his father, was mainly educated on the continent, living in France from the age of 9 onwards, attending various military schools, most noteworthy the Military Academy in Paris, where he achieved the rank of lieutenant. His military star would only continue to rise with his triumphant successes and excellent leadership skills. Fighting for the army of the French Republic as the fledgling and floundering democracy desperately hoped to maintain its newfound freedom in the face of the military ambitions of other European powers who were not so keen on the new French regime. By the time Napoleon's star started to rise in the army of the First French Republic in 1795, the French Revolution was already an experiment in liberty that had seemingly gone very wrong. After King Louis XVI had been overthrown and the French monarchy dissolved, with a National Assembly to lead the way, the revolutionaries, at first keen on the ideas of reason and personal autonomy, had seemingly switched, turning on any perceived enemies of their revolution. Although these revolutionaries were far from united, the most vocal, violent, and often powerful wing of the revolutionary force was the Jacobins, and the Committee of Public Safety led by the most radical of revolutionaries, Maximilien Robespierre. Robespierre and his committee exacted harsh revenge and punishment on any who stood against the revolution, leading to the Reign of Terror in 1793 to 1794, where thousands of counter-revolutionaries, including priests, opposing revolutionaries, royalists to the kings, and the deposed French nobility, including Louis XVI and his Austrian wife Marie Antoinette, were murdered, often beheaded by guillotine. The French Revolution had gone from violence and upheaval with pronounced change to anarchy and chaos with no seeming order, even seeing Robespierre and some of his allies destroyed in the process. Historians often debate whether Napoleon was an ally or enemy of the revolution. He viewed himself as a former. But they cannot ignore the effects of the revolution on Napoleon, and conversely, the impact on the revolution by Napoleon's actions. In the mid-1790s, after leading the outnumbered French forces in several major victories against the British, Austrians, and Prussians, all who sought to avenge the overthrow of the Bourbon dynasty, and in the Revolution, Napoleon proved his loyalty to the ruling government, the Directory, by stamping out counter-revolutionaries. As his military star started to shine, so did his love life. Josephine de Beauharnais, an older widow, captured his heart. She was known for her philandering, however, and would continue even after they were married. However, by all accounts, she remained the great love of his life, and he remained hers. They were married in 1796, the same year Napoleon began his first major campaign in Italy, where he defeated Austrians and Italians and sowed the seeds of an independent republic in the Italian peninsula. After this, fearful of the end of the revolution in France with the rise of royalist factions in the Directory, Napoleon simply did away with it in 1799, establishing a consulate with a constitution giving him supreme power. Although a staunch advocate of Enlightenment reasoning and thought, Napoleon believed that he was the one to guide France, not the people, and some have seen this move as the end of the French Revolution. As a new century dawned, Napoleon continued his vast successes. In order to stop him, European powers, including Russia, Prussia, Austria, Great Britain, and the Holy Roman Empire, rose up against him, forming coalition armies which were constantly repulsed, each time more severely than the last, and Napoleon established a firmer hold on Switzerland, Holland, northern Italy, and Spain. His incursions into modern-day Germany grew as well, with him ultimately dissolving the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire, which he saw as pointless, in order to create a French puppet state, the Confederation of the Rhine, in its stead. But his principal enemy would be his ultimate bane, the British. In order to fund an army large enough to invade the island empire to the north, along with his continental system embargo, Napoleon sold his New World holdings to the United States in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. With his dominance and might now unquestioned, Napoleon reached for something greater than being the military dictator of a supposed republic. No, the great commander wanted for himself imperial glory, refusing to let the Pope do it, as had been the case with Charlemagne a millennium earlier. A man of reason and hubris, albeit at least formally religious and friendly to Catholicism, Napoleon crowned himself as the first emperor of France on December 2, 1804 at Rheims Cathedral in Paris, then placed the crown of the empress on Josephine. France now had an emperor, and one that seemingly could not be defeated. Everywhere he went, victory had seemingly followed him, especially on land. And despite many claiming he had ended the French Revolution by creating his own empire and tyranny, Napoleon spread the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity wherever he went. Almost paradoxically, he also reorganized French educational services, but his civil legal code set the basis for modern law, not just in France but throughout the West. And just like the Romans, whom he so admired, Napoleon's greatest domestic accomplishment may have been in the field of law. Napoleon had been setting them up and knocking them down for a while, but not without trial. To show his immense command over Europe's affairs and probably just to feed his equally immense ego, he placed his brother Joseph on the Spanish throne, which instantly caused rebellion and fighting with the Portuguese and Great Britain, and the long, complicated peninsular war that would drag on for years and greatly vex the Emperor of Europe. That emperor had been setting them up and knocking them down, and had never stood taller, though the legends of his short height probably come from British cartoons ridiculing him. But this had not been without trial and defeat. For instance, the invasion of Egypt to attack British India in 1798 and 1799 had ended in defeat with fierce opposition from the combined British and Ottoman forces, and his greatest challenge remained Britain's greatest strength, the Royal Navy. Napoleon could not invade or subjugate the British without defeating their grandiose navy, and this great sea power soundly defeated him on many occasions, especially Trafalgar in 1805 under the command of Lord Nelson. The British, especially their navy, were a thorn in Napoleon's side throughout his reign, even as his embargo spread to other countries. The continental system, he perilously continued to hope, would bring the British to their knees, and by 1806 it did seem like an actual possibility, particularly with Napoleon's greatest victory, Austerlitz. Against a combined Austrian and Russian force, Napoleon not only gave up his high ground advantage, but also gave the impression that he was retreating and destroying his own equipment. This led to an ill-fated charge by his enemies, who were repelled by skilled grenadiers and well-trained cavalry. Austria, like Prussia soon after, was neutralized, now a part of the ever-expanding Napoleonic sphere of influence. Domestically, like the revolutionaries before him, Napoleon promoted infrastructure and public works, not just in France, but throughout the European areas he became to dominate. Austerlitz gave him an excuse for a public works spectacle that would celebrate his great victory, the Arc de Triomphe, which would not be finished until long after his death, a way to celebrate powerful French victories and Napoleonic exceptionalism. After a number of victories in Tilsit the following year, Napoleon forced Prussia and Russia to join his continental system. Tsar Alexander I, an emperor in his own right, hesitated but felt he had no choice. The embargo weakened Great Britain, but especially Russia, and Alexander would not be easily subdued. In 1811, he broke the treaty and began commercial relations with the British. Napoleon's answer, as it had been in so many circumstances before, was invasion, but this time on a scale never seen before. His ground army numbered over 500,000 strong and marched on Russia in summer of 1812. Alexander and the Russians hesitated and frequently retreated, burning land as they went, before showing off against Napoleon at the Battle of Borodino, and despite the battle being very much a draw, one the Russians could be proud of, Napoleon's might could not be questioned. He entered Moscow and waited for a surrender that never came. What came instead was fire. The Russians burned their capital rather than let Napoleon control it. Horrified and with nothing else to do, the emperor retreated with his forces in the fall, and the bitter Russian winter starting to set in. And with the Russians having the home field advantage, Alexander mobilized guerrilla operations and skirmishes that devastated the French forces, leaving the Grand Armée gutted and Napoleon rarely yet soundly defeated. This defeat encouraged his enemies, who, with the Tsar, rallied an impressive force, the Sixth Coalition, and vanquished Napoleon, deposing and exiling him in 1814. He was sent to Alba, a small island off the coast of Tuscany. In a move that would prove to be ridiculously foolish in hindsight, they gave the disgraced conqueror control over the island, where he would immediately begin reforming the infrastructure and domestic policies of the isle. However, the ruler of France could not stay away for long. After plotting, in 1815, he covertly returned to France, and most famously as he was landing, and a garrison force of restored King Louis XVIII's forces approached him, ready to arrest him or worse. The general showed his bravado by ripping open his jacket and declaring, "If there is anyone among you who wants to kill his general and his emperor, here I am." The daring move worked, as the soldiers and soon other garrisons of the French army rallied to Napoleon's side, and within a fortnight he was emperor again, but not for long. The Seventh Coalition, led by the Prussians and the British, sought to stop Napoleon's new army as it moved into the Netherlands once again. This led to the climactic and eventful Battle of Waterloo on Sunday, June 18, 1815. The battle would become the swan song of history's greatest general and ended in French defeat at the hands of the British, thanks to the backup by the Prussians. This defeat would be even more costly, with Napoleon being deposed and removed from power, the Bourbons being restored once again to the French throne, and as the Europeans met and reorganized Europe at the Council of Vienna, they created a balance of power to keep any one nation from becoming too foreboding, with France losing much land, and Napoleon was sent to St. Helena off the coast of South America, a tiny island even more remote and small than Elba, where he would stay alone until his death in 1821 at the age of 51, Josephine having died in 1814. The life of the first French emperor and the greatest general of all time ended on a tiny rock with a whimper and not a bang.